All right, so we're excited to have Dr. Kimberly Duong here today. She is a civil engineer, project manager, and a productivity coach. And she works with PhD students specifically, so serving some of our UCI folks as well as those in her community. So she has received her Master's of Science and PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering from UC Irvine, and her bachelor's in Atmospheric Sciences from UCLA. She has over 10 plus years of project management, leadership, STEM, outreach, and mentorship experience in a whole different fields and different types of industries, including academia, government, nonprofits, and entrepreneurship as well. So she has quite a diverse background, and she's been able to take those experiences and transform them into opportunities to go to places like Melbourne, Australia for her wetlands work, as well as Washington, D.C. for science policy. So she's been able to transform her skills and her time as a PhD into actionable things that have become sort of experiences beyond just doing research for the sake of research. And she actually was able to recently speak on a podcast, specifically the Papa PhD podcast about goal setting as an early career researcher. I will drop in the links to get connected as well as to check out that podcast as well, but I'm more than happy to pass it along to Kimberly now. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Joanne, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm glad that we have a group where I can engage with you directly and get to know you more as well. Joanne gave a really good overview of my background, and I've gone through a lot of different experiences. Right now, I work in government as a civil engineer and project manager for large-scale water infrastructure projects. But in the past, I've done science policy work at the federal level. I've run nonprofit. I run my own business as well. So I'm happy to take any questions either about my PhD experience or experiences outside of that afterwards. So I'm hoping that people have some questions because I'd love to figure out what you're interested in so I can, really address that part.
Excellent. Did you want everyone to briefly introduce themselves, or would you like that
if you
at a
feel
different time?
comfortable, I would love to get to know everyone here. And I don't know, Joanne, you can do popcorn or something.
Yeah, I see, Nitish, you already have your webcam on. Let's do it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Ren, for organizing this once again, and Kimberly for taking the time to speak with us. My name is Nitish Nagesh. I'm a second year computer science PhD student. I'm working on recommendation systems, specifically AI for healthcare. So I'm trying to see how to build food recommendation systems to improve overall mental well-being of people. And a specific target population that I've become interested recently is in pregnant women. So how to help pregnant women manage their diet so that they're able to go through that process in a smoother manner, especially the mental wellness aspect of it. So I'm here to learn more about how you manage all those projects, and more importantly, how you're able to somehow do coaching and what that entire process is all about.
Excellent. Thank you. And then Natalie, I also dropped in the chat if it helps you to introduce yourself, a little bit of structure, name, department, research topic. Thank you, Natish.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Natalie. I'm actually a first year PhD student in the biomedical engineering department. So I'm actually rotating right now in immunomodulation lab. I'm also interested in biomaterials. So by March 10th, I'll know what exact research topic I'm working on. But I'm just really excited to hear about, what Nitish said, how you balance coaching. That's something I really want to do in the future. And even just throughout my PhD somehow. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here, Natalie.
Thank you.
And welcome
Natalie,
to...
what was your department again? I missed that, sorry.
Oh, sorry, biomedical engineering.
Okay, thank you.
Kayla, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm also a biomedical engineering PhD student. I'm in my third year, and I'm working on a droplet microfluidics platform to do combinatorial drug screening for blood cancer.
It's really awesome. Thank you for being here.
And thanks for being here.
Hunter, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi. My name is Hunter. I'm a fifth year PhD student in civil and environmental engineering. And I do research on various modeling approaches for non-traditional water sources, right now focusing on risk assessment and antibiotic resistance within wastewater reuse. And yeah, I'm hoping to finish up and graduate soon. So here to just learn some of your journey and different perspectives, transitioning from this into whatever's next.
Excellent. You're almost there. You got this.
Thanks.
And I think, is it Nader?
It's
I'm
Nader.
pronouncing-
Hey, my name
Excellent.
is Nader. I actually just joined UCI as a postdoc in civil and environmental engineering. I already got my PhD in environmental engineering from University of South Florida. And my research focused on sustainability assessment of water and wastewater infrastructures and treatment options.
Excellent. Well, welcome to UCI.
Thank you.
All right. Kimberly, do you want to start with sort of your academic journey and then how you ended up transitioning to where you're at, or you can start wherever you feel is a
Great.
good starting point.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's very nice to meet you. I've been taking some notes, so hopefully I took the right notes for each person. And yeah, I'll briefly talk about my experience. I went to UCLA for atmospheric sciences, and I was there to, by the end, I thought I was going to become a meteorologist, so forecasting weather. And then I switched to the water field because the meteorology world is pretty small and kind of limited in terms of career options. And after undergrad, I joined this summer program that was focused more on water sustainability. It was hosted through UCI with a bunch of other UC schools, and that allowed me the opportunity to go to Australia to do field work on wetlands and constructed wetlands and other sustainable water capture options. And water treatment options as well. They call them low energy options for water treatment so that it's not as energy intensive as the wastewater treatment plants we have traditionally in civil engineering. So after that experience, I decided to go to UCI for my PhD program, and there I did a lot of different things. I wrote a literature review on wastewater reuse. So I heard, Hunter, you're working on some wastewater reuse stuff, so that's interesting to hear. After that, I kind of pivoted towards urban drought. My PhD was from 2014 to 2019, and so that was bulk of that was during the really extreme California drought. And so I had a lot of timely information and data. I worked with the Irvine Ranch Water District, which is local to the UCI area. And we had a collaboration where, I took some of their data, I played with it in models and basically wrote papers that were related to what that looked like for Southern California. And that allowed me to get experience in local watersheds. And eventually, after I graduated with my PhD, I decided to go into a civil engineering role so that it was less research focused, more hands-on projects. And that's currently what I'm doing. But along the way, during my PhD, I did a lot of different side projects. I was running a climate education nonprofit called Climatepedia. I'm no longer there, but they're in good hands. And we did a lot of climate action and education, and they're still doing that now. I also was working on science policy. So I took about 3-4 months to move to Washington, DC to do a fellowship program through the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. It's called the Mirzayan Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. I'm happy to talk about that if anyone is interested. They have a yearly fellowship for 3 to 4 months, and they have a small cohort of people from around the country who are PhD students or graduate students interested in science policy work. And there I helped with the assessment on the fourth National Climate Assessment draft, and also with the formation of the climate change, climate action committee at the academies. And so that gathered a lot of experts in climate to Washington, D.C. to talk about really high level policies, high level priorities for the nation when it comes to climate action. So those were really exciting projects for me to work on. And I learned a lot while I was there about science policy. And when I came back to UCI to finish my PhD, kind of kept that in mind. And, you know, hopefully one day I'll make my way back to Washington, D.C. But for now, I'm pretty happy doing the civil engineering work at the local level, because I think that's really where grassroots change is in terms of climate action and infrastructure improvement. And so I'm kind of picking and choosing little experiences here and there, but I think in total it gives this diverse set of experiences that I found very enriching, and gave me more diversity in terms of the kinds of things that I was doing. It wasn't just sitting at the computer, coding, modeling. I was going out there and doing all kinds of different things. And lastly, the thing that I heard a few people interested in is the coaching. So I work with PhD students or even prospective PhD students to kind of help them through their journey. Most of them have been STEM students. I think that's where there's a lack of coaching available. And so I help them with time management, managing up, and working with priority setting, goals, and making sure that they don't get overwhelmed, because there's always too much to do, but you only have so little time. And so we work usually one-on-one, but I also give workshops. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. And if anyone is interested in that, I think Joanne has linked my contact information. I'm happy to chat with anyone about that, my experience, or if you're interested in working with me as well, I'm happy to do that. So I'll leave it at that and see if there's any specific questions anyone has.
I can pull us along as we're going, and just to start the questions that I have. So I see that you've been able to sort of be fluid between science policy, government work, industry, as well as, opening up your own business. What are how did you go through identifying the skills that you needed to do that, and then developing them? And how did you sort of manage that throughout either your PhD? Did you start earlier on, or what are some tips that you have there?
Yeah, so one of my favorite tools for getting into an industry or getting into a topic that I have no experience in is doing as many informational interviews as possible. And for people who are not familiar with that, it's like a reverse interview. You're asking someone who is in a position that you might want to be in or that you're interested in, and you ask them questions about what do they do day to day, how did they get into this field, what is the educational or skill type background that they needed to get to this level, what are the skills that they currently need to do their job well, and what is their work-life balance look like. All of these questions that are related to getting into learning what is the identity of a person who does this. And so when I first got interested in science policy, I applied to that Mirzayan Fellowship in Washington, D.C. It's very competitive, and I had no prior science policy experience. I think it was in the span of 2 weeks, I had over 20 informational interviews after reaching out to all of the alumni that I could find. And I talked with anyone who would meet with me. I asked them all kinds of questions, and that kind of helped me get an idea of what is it like to be in their shoes when they were in that fellowship. And so that really helped me figure out, okay, I don't have these skills that I think that I need to have. And so now I know what I need to focus on, because there's lots of things that you could focus on, but the ones that are most important are the ones that I really, really tried to target, because I was on a very tight deadline. I don't think it was even a month between the time that I found out about the fellowship and I applied. So I was on a real time crunch, and that helped me shortcut, figuring out what the priorities were.
That's excellent. Thank you. Take a pause for anyone who has sort of extra questions from there.
Can you perhaps, because that's pretty interesting, you only had a month, can you perhaps dive into just a couple of the skills, if you remember, that you had to develop, and like how you went about cultivating them? Because sometimes it just seems kind of intangible. Like, what does it mean to build skills? I think of it as like a year-long process, but you did it in a month. So I'm just curious how you went about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was interested in, as my questions got better over the course of these informational interviews. At first, it was things like, what's your background? And what are you studying? And what did you work on when you were a fellow? I think those are kind of surface level questions that you could ask someone who's in that position. And towards the end, I sort of got into the mode of saying something like, there are lots of qualified applicants. What do you think made your application stand out most? And for them, I heard a common theme, which was that they wanted applicants who are not only very qualified and capable of doing research, but that they were very eager to learn and that they were interested in working in science policy. And that means that you actually don't do as much quantitative work. And so people who are used to being on the data side, who are used to running models and looking at numbers and making assessments based on that, that is a totally different skill set than looking at the data and then interpreting that in a way that is also taking into account the policy, the culture, the history, the values, basically the non-technical, non-numerical aspects of whatever they're working on. So it could be something like, in my field, for example, wastewater reuse is somewhat contentious in some areas. And in other places, the wastewater reuse is just a normal thing in society. And the reason for that is not based on whether the water treatment numbers were worse or better. The treatment capabilities were the same. The technology was the same. The difference was the history of that society or that community when it came to wastewater reuse. Was there issues of unfair treatment or inequities, and was there any was that a political agenda that someone took up? And that involved more non-technical work than technical work. So I think what I learned most in Washington, D.C. is that for scientists, numbers matter, but for policymakers, words matter. And so learning what it means to use words that have numerical or technical or data-based, evidence is kind of tricky. And that is in itself a whole new skill set that I had to develop. I didn't develop it before I went there, but while I was there, I definitely worked on that.
So it sounds like there are sort of tiers to learning a new skill or developing a new skill. It's the first surface level of knowing sort of the preliminary questions to ask.
Right. Yeah.
And then beyond that, it's knowing the more advanced questions to ask the application of that particular skill and how there are effects that sort of are consequences of a particular decision that comes from that. And so it sounds like it's more of like a layered approach. Is that a good summary of that?
Yeah,
Excellent.
especially when it comes to science policy. Absolutely. You could do a fantastic report of this new technology and the presidential offices change and that report gets shelved for 8 years. And that's how things are there. Like, it's not a matter of when technologies are ready, of when the data says that we're ready. It really needs to be whether the values, the priorities, and the agenda of the dominating party in power is going to be amenable to whatever technology or whatever aspect of science policy that is. So that was really interesting for me, and I think not something that we normally have to consider in research, because if we're researching it, that means then there's interest, but that doesn't necessarily mean implementation wise that things are going to go smoothly, or that the implementation is dependent only on whether the numbers say that we're ready or not.
I'm curious from your perspective, how would you, because I know the industry is a skills-based market, how would you translate that on like a resume or an interview?
My science policy background?
The skill sets that you've developed.
Yeah, so I think it would be completely dependent on what type of job that I would be applying for. If I was looking for a job where I would be managing a large team or a large budget, then I would point to experiences in the past where I had myself managed maybe a budget or a team on a smaller scale, but did that successfully. And I would name how many there were, and maybe point to something like managed a team of 20 people to successfully carry out X, Y, and Z projects. And that might translate to saying in an interview that, with the limited number of staff that I had, we were able to accomplish all of this. So with an even larger staff, I would be able to 10x that amount because of economies of scale or something like that. So I think it really depends on what the role is and what the company is looking for in terms of what they want to see in a new applicant or a new candidate. But there is where I would also do informational interviews with people who already work there to see what the company actually values.
If I may ask, how are you finding these people?
Oh, I am constantly talking to new people. And when I meet anyone new, at the end of every conversation, I ask sometimes if it's a type of conversation where I feel like I want to go even deeper, I might ask, can you think of 3 people who would be good for me to talk to next? And that gives them an idea. Even if it's not 3 people, usually they can think of 1. And so there's just this large network of people I continually meet, and I keep track of them in a little spreadsheet. And there's just so many different areas of interest that I have that I don't really run out of people to talk with. But it can be as simple as finding someone on LinkedIn who has the job that you're interested in and messaging them and saying if you can, even send them an email with a few questions if they would be willing to answer a question on LinkedIn, or if they'd be willing to chat with you for 10 minutes on a call. And it could be as easy as that. Or if you have an existing contact, your advisor who works with a collaborator at a different school, you could ask to be connected with that collaborator's students who are working on something you're interested in. I think we have a lot of options in our network. They're called weak ties. Outside of our close ties, which are the people that we work with, each one of those people have their own network that we're not exposed to yet. And I think it's a lot easier than people might think to ask someone who hey, do you know anyone who works in X, Y, and Z? And they say, well, I'm not sure, but I know someone who I think does. So let me ask them if they know someone. And so sometimes it doesn't always translate to, the kind of conversation that you're looking for, but there's always more people to ask, especially with LinkedIn, especially with the career services, alumni services. I think there's plenty of options out there. I see a hand. Is that a raised hand emoji?
Yeah. I wasn't sure if there was an order for questions.
No, this is meant to be a fireside conversation, very
Okay,
casual, explore anything you're looking for.
Okay, cool. It seems that you're doing a lot of stuff, Kimberly, and you have many experiences that has, led you to what you're doing today. I want to ask you about the mentorship area, and so a couple of things there. One thing is that I kind of like became by accident kind of like a PhD coach, just because I guess I was reflecting about my own PhD struggles in a way that I was like sharing how I was able to overcome them to friends and other people that I guess, they saw me as like, oh, it seems that he already figured it out. I mean, not quite, right? Because I was like juggling, right? But through time, and it's been 1 year out from when I finished the PhD, I keep receiving emails from people saying like, hey, I saw that you won X and Y and that you're doing this, and you'll be willing to mentor me or have those conversations, which I always welcome, right? If I struggle, I feel that other people shouldn't struggle, right? But my concrete question is about resources in terms of specific resources that you can point me that they're out there so I can keep building those kind of like PhD coaching skill. Because I mean, up until now, it's more of I've been building on like my experiences and formal, like for example, project management seminars that I have taken that allows you to think about how you can manage different people with different personalities and, support them, whatever, their support might need. But sometimes it's hard to find like very specific academia based training in terms of like supporting other graduate students or learning those skills.
Yeah. So I think I didn't hear your introduction. Are you a postdoc or a recent grad?
I'm a postdoc now.
Okay. And what field are you in?
So that's a funny thing because I'm an interdisciplinary scholar. So my bachelor's is on social sciences, but then I have an MS on water management, and then I have a PhD on urban planning and public policy. So that mix has allowed me to kind of like traverse between academic world and policy worlds.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I heard that you have been taking seminars already, so that's great as well. If you were looking for other resources related to coaching, I think it kind of depends on who you're helping. So if you're helping students, PhD students, or just in general early career, like I think it depends on what are they interested in. And so that might mean that you're reading more into their fields just to get an idea of what the culture might be there. If you're working primarily with STEM students, then it might be helpful to speak with people who are doing that work. Like I could talk to you and share my experiences with you. That's people are resources as well. If you're interested in podcasts or anything, I've really enjoyed a lot of podcasts by psychologists, organizational psychologists. There's a TED sponsored one called Work Life by Adam Grant. And there are some other psychology based and there are also some coaching focused resources as well. But I think we would have to talk more for me to give you resources that are more specific to what you're looking for. But yeah, I would say we can chat afterwards, or you can look into some of those podcasts. I see some more people have joined as well. Joanne, do you usually go to those, or do we just keep going?
We can keep going, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If there's any other questions that are lingering, I'm happy to jump into those tangents. But I'm curious, with so many things that you have going on, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does a day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, so I think of my day-to-day as seasonal. Last year, I was really focused on, on top of my full-time job, I was really focused on coaching because I was just getting a lot of interest. And I think because of the post-COVID environment, there are people who are interested in coaching. I was really focused on that last year. And this year is a new season. I'm focusing on studying for my license exams to become a professional engineer. And that is kind of a years-long process of taking several tests and going through the certification process to get that license. So right now I'm not doing as much coaching because of that time constraint, but it really depended on the season. I can see how someone from the outside might think like, oh, you're doing 10 different things at once. It wasn't at once, for sure. It was like 1, 2, maybe 3 things at one time for a few months at a time. And then I kind of switched gears to doing something else because I just wouldn't be able to focus on that many things at one time. So I'm content with doing that right now. I've deprioritized certain things so that others can be prioritized. And I have a lot more clarity about what I need to get done day to day because of that. So for example, yesterday I went to work and then I studied for a few hours and then I exercised and I had dinner and that was it. But it doesn't really need to be as complex as I think productivity gurus want to make it sound. I think it's just a matter of what works for you. And for me right now, it's simplest just to be studying and working. And that's all I can focus on right now. I think, Nitesh, you have a question?
Definitely. So I just have a question in terms of how all this works for international students. I know that if you're international, then you're supposed to work for a specific company and then follow a specific contract. How to do all of this, maybe on a student visa or an international work visa? Do you know anyone who has done it, or could you point us to some resource?
I personally don't have that experience. From what I've heard of international students, you're limited in what you can do for part-time work. And so if you want to get the experience without having to either exceed that limitation from your visa, you could consider volunteer opportunities, but I think it's a lot trickier than that, right? So if you have an option to somehow combine that with your research and to nest it underneath the research that you're currently doing and that you're there to do as a student, then I think that might, address the two things together. If you have a more specific example, maybe I can speak to that, but I think that would be the clearest and the simplest way to explore different things while also not, stepping over any limitations related to an international visa.
Thank you. Thank you. Joanne, do you have any other comments on this? Maybe you have researched this aspect.
Yeah, so from the perspective of the employer side, they have sort of limitations. I would look for, I think there was a website, and I can drop it in chat once I find it, but it's like an H-1B website that lists all of the companies that will provide some type of visa and are international friendly. So those are the companies that you off the bat, you want to interact with those companies. They are probably most likely going to be able to give you your next opportunity and or the opportunity that you're looking for, because they have a system in place to be able to help support individuals from that particular scenario. So let me get that dropped in the chat. I think it's like H-1B grader or something like that. And then other things I would say, definitely any resources that are already going on campus, maximize that time, because it's all free for you here as students. And if you need more harder skill sets and proof of project slash like skill sets to develop, hackathons are great opportunities that are sort of very concentrated time to build and have a product at the end of it, and also be able to have awards and recognition without needing to worry about the visas and or any type of international status, because you're under a student. But that gives you another sense of experience as well as platform to say that I've done something similar. I have a product at the end of it. I would say that's closer to more of this harder sciences, harder engineering types of roles if you're aiming for that. For coaching, volunteering, and definitely being able to get into contact with people of power. They will be people who will be able to help get you through major hoops and hurdles when it comes to more of the heavy paperwork. It's just the infrastructure that is there.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Joanne said. Before I completed my engineering degrees, I was able to get some experience by doing projects on a volunteer basis. So you may have heard of Solar Decathlon. I think it's an international program hosted by Department of Energy, and you literally build a house that is net zero energy. And so through that, I was able to work with engineers and do some of the engineering work without actually having an engineering license. And under their supervision, we were involved with creating that house. And when I was an undergrad, I did an EPA project. There's lots of student-based competitions and projects that you can get involved with that provide resources like mentoring in that industry. And so I think maybe hackathon is the one for computer science, but I think every discipline has their own version of that kind of sponsored project where students can kind of get that hands-on experience.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Joanne.
Sure, so I dropped in H-1B grader, great resource if you're international and you're looking for companies. It's as long as I think if you know the rules of the game, if you know who's playing along in the same rules, you'll find it a lot easier than applying and finding that, oh, I didn't know you were international. We had some issues with that in the first place and sort of wasting your time there. So if you're trying to be strategic, trying to make sure that you apply to the right places in the first place. All right, so if there's no other questions, we can go ahead and move along then. Something that comes up and sort of taking a little bit more deeper dive into when you say work, what does work mean? What does that look like to you? One of the barriers that's commonly present in the PhD world transitioning out from academia is that looks very, very different from an academic world, or maybe it doesn't, and that's a good thing too. So when you say work, Kimberly, what does your day-to-day look like for work, or what types of, what's your schedule like in work?
Yeah, so I'm currently a civil engineer, and my primary role is as a project manager. That means that I'm not doing the design work because I work at a large organization. Every group has their own specialty. If you're working at a smaller boutique firm where you might only have 5 to 20 people, then you might be wearing more hats just because everyone needs to be flexible. But at a larger organization, your responsibilities may be a lot more specific to a certain type of task, just because breaking that down makes it more efficient for the entire organization. And so this is not necessarily unique to engineering, but that's kind of how my experience has been so far. And you might experience that as well in your disciplines. If you go into your field as a practitioner in some way, you may not be using all of the skill sets and all of the things that you learned in school because you're simply just not able to accommodate doing every part of the process. So for me, a day-to-day for a project manager is lots of meetings, emails, and processing things like making sure that different disciplines are getting what they need in order to move forward. So for a construction project, that might mean that I need to talk to the real estate group to make sure that we have the right to go onto, another organization, another property in order to get our construction equipment through. Or it might mean that I need to speak with the Department of Transportation to make sure that the traffic flow in advance of upcoming construction is okay. Maybe that means I need to look at the parking situation and talk with the public affairs group who is in charge of, getting all these complaints. And that might mean that in one day, I'm speaking to 10 different parts of the organization. They might not necessarily themselves be engineers, which means that I have to do a lot of translating between the designers and, let's say, the intergovernmental affairs group. They need to know, I don't care about the size of this pipe. I just want to know what's the impact for residents trying to get in and out of their houses. So that role as the translator, as the intermediary between different groups, means that I have to do a lot of code switching. Sometimes it's more technical, sometimes it's not technical at all. And as part of my role as a project manager, that also sometimes means interfacing with the city council offices, giving briefings, giving talks, and taking questions that I may not necessarily be able to answer. I think that's one aspect that is drastically different from academia, is that in academia, you're sort of given this expectation that if you don't know, then you need to learn it so that you will know in the future. And in a work environment, it's just impossible to know everything. And so delegating that, or at least redirecting that question to the appropriate group, makes more sense than you going out, figuring that information on your own, and then being the person who answers that question from now on. It's just not efficient. And it's also not your role to be the person who knows all of those things on this topic. So I think that's where I've found that the transition from academia has been different. It's not so much how much I know, it's more of how much am I getting done so that others can do their work as well.
That's excellent. And that's very, very, very true from a biomedical standpoint. Engineering, that's where I sort of said it's that code switching of why does it matter to the person that I'm talking to versus why does it matter for if I'm talking to like regulatory affairs. So I hear a lot of sort of soft skills that are needed for this type of project management role. What sort of other skills or what skills and attributes that you believe made you a very strong candidate for that type of project management role?
I think having leadership experience was really helpful because it helped me understand the perspective of my managers. So because I work in a large organization, we have lots of levels of management, and it makes sense because you need to have checks and balances. You need to have some level of oversight for these projects that are, billions of dollars. And so me having had that experience running a nonprofit, overseeing staff, overseeing budgets, made me more aware of what they are interested in briefings, in meetings. When they ask a question, I come across this quite often when what we call ICs, or individual contributors, people who are not in leadership or management roles, they have a tendency to believe that because their work is X, like they're focusing on the design of this one project, that is what they should be talking about. They can only talk about the design of the project, when really, from a management perspective, they want to know how that design fits in with the rest of the ecosystem of this company or this project. And so you commenting, and IC commenting on just this very specific small design thing, yeah, it sort of answers the question, but the question underneath that question is, why does this matter? How does this affect other aspects of the project? How much is this going to delay? How much is this going to cost? What's the alternative that could be cheaper, maybe not as optimized? And so that's, I think, the deeper level of understanding that I was able to have based on having that experience as a manager, because ICs do 100% of IC work. Managers might do 30 to 0% of IC work. And so they need to have a big picture. And so you knowing what the big picture is going to help a lot in that communication.
I love that you're able to sort of delineate between individual contributors, and those have a different type of archetype, skill sets, versus if you're looking for a more managerial type of role, more directing role, that skill set's very, very different. And in fact, even what makes you unique is that you have a domain specific expertise, right? You're a PhD, and then you have additional skill sets that you've developed because of your experience in nonprofit and other things that you've chosen to explore out of, it sounds like, passion and excitement, that have layered and created a well-rounded individual for these types of management roles.
Thank you.
So if you're looking, if for those of you on here sort of thinking, should I be in this type of role? Should I be in this type of role? I think, especially from a management role, being able to have that foresight, the anticipation that this isn't just a one-time sort of scenario, it's a one-time scenario, and then for everyone else, scaling that up beyond that. So thank you for providing that perspective. And I'm going to end with this last question before I just have any additional questions from everyone else. But what's your general advice for PhDs and postdocs who are looking to be in a similar role, whether it's in industry or coaching or entrepreneurship with coaching, nonprofit, government types of jobs?
My advice for people who are looking to have a certain role they have in mind, and what I mentioned earlier, is doing informational interviews with the person you want to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, all of the above, and getting an idea of what their life is like. And not just getting one person's version of that, but talking to, if specifically, I want to work at the EPA, and in 10 years, I want to be a director level, and I want to be working specifically on wastewater treatment, then find the people that are both at that role and everywhere in between, as much as you can, so that you can understand what the evolution of that looks like. Part of the reason why I moved away from meteorology is that the industry that it's in requires very unforgiving times. It's shift work, it's 24 hours. So if you're not working nights, you're working some kind of weird schedule. If you want to promote, you might have to move to a completely different state. And that just wasn't kind of the lifestyle I wanted to have. Is I wanted to have options so that I wouldn't have to decide between the city that I want to live in or the management role that I wanted to be in. And so civil engineering gave me some of the aspects of meteorology that I enjoyed that are not compromising on the lifestyle that I wanted. So I think that's really important to talk with the people you want to be in the future, and also to recognize that outside of that job or role that you want to do, what do you want your life to look like? And right now it might feel like as a student, I have to do everything I can to get through this because I'm just, if I don't, then I'm not going to finish. It's not that urgent when you're in your career. If you don't move on to the next stage, whatever that's supposed to mean, you still have a job. You're still working in your job right now, as opposed to being a student. There's an expiration on how long you can be a student. Whereas when you're in a job, you have the luxury of being able to really take your time picking and choosing what you want your life to look like, both outside of work and at work. So I would hope that people have given some thought to what they want out of their lifestyle, and that they find the people and talk to them, talk to the people who have the lifestyle that they are thinking that they might want.
I think that's so true, to have, those anchor points of your core values, right? What do you actually want to get out of your career, out of your life? And does that role actually make sense for that in the first place? So then I love your data-driven perspective, which is find the people, talk to them. Does it check your boxes? Does it come up over and over and over again? If it does, generally that's a good sign. So that's excellent. I will open it up to everyone else who has any other questions. I know that's been pretty casual. I'm also going to drop into the chat contact information, as well as her coaching website, if you're interested in seeing what's going on there and to explore more specifically your particular journey. But I'm going to take a pause to say thank you as we're wrapping up, and so appreciate your time today. Are there any lingering questions from anyone?